Okay, get ready for a wild ride, folks, because today we're taking a deep dive into a story that's, well, it's a bit of a roller coaster.
Buckle up.
We're going way back to the 19th century. Picture it. America, post-Civil War, the economy is booming.
Oh, yeah.
New inventions like the telephone and the light bulb are popping up everywhere you look.
A really exciting time.
Cities are exploding with people and new possibilities, but for single women, well, things weren't quite so rosy.
Not quite so rosy.
Especially when it came to their finances, they were pretty much stuck in a system that didn't give them a lot of options.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You have all this progress and innovation going on, but a huge chunk of the population is essentially shut out from participating in the economic boom.
Right.
It really shows how societal norms can be incredibly slow to change, even when everything else is moving at lightning speed.
It's crazy. So now, enter Sarah Howe.
Sarah Howe.
Born around 1826, this woman's life was, well, let's just say it was colorful. We're talking fortune teller, multiple marriages,
Wow.
accusations of fraud swirling around her. There are even hints of potential mental health struggles.
Interesting.
But then, bam, she completely reinvents herself as a financial agent focused on empowering women.
Talk about a career pivot.
A serious career pivot.
We have to remember the cultural context here. Spiritualism, fortune-telling, these were hugely popular back then, especially among women. There was this real fascination with mystical, and Howe was tapping right into it.
Right.
But at the same time, these economic booms often breed get-rich-quick schemes, and that desperation can make people very vulnerable.
So she was kind of playing both sides.
Exactly.
The spiritual advisor and this savvy businesswoman.
In 1879, she sets up the Ladies' Deposit Company in Boston,
Okay.
a bank specifically for women, single women, and widows.
Targeting a very specific demographic.
And here's the kicker. She promises them an 8% return on their deposits every single month.
Wait, hold on. 8% monthly.
8% monthly.
That's insane. Even by today's standards for high-risk investments, that's unheard of. Did people actually buy into that?
Oh, they did. And this is where Howe's, maybe genius is the right word, or maybe cunning, really shines through.
Okay.
She used word-of-mouth marketing within these women's social circles, whispering about exclusivity, secrecy. There are stories of women begging their husbands or brothers for loans just so they could invest with Howe. That's how powerful that allure of 8% a month was.
Wow. She was creating this fear of missing out, this in-group that everyone wanted to be a part of.
Exactly, yeah, and that's a classic hallmark of what we now call affinity scams.
Right.
They target specific groups based on a shared identity, in this case, women wanting financial freedom. They prey on the trust that already exists within the group. It's incredibly effective and, unfortunately, a very powerful tactic.
Wow. Okay, so how did she pull this off? We're talking pre-internet, pre-instant communication.
Yeah.
Did this scheme go on for years?
It did, yeah. For almost 2 years, the Ladies' Deposit Company thrived. Howe would take new deposits and use that money to pay the promised interest to the earlier investors.
Classic Ponzi scheme.
Sex book. But remember, the term wasn't even around back then. She kept the books incredibly simple, almost intentionally messy. And crucially, she wasn't actually investing the money anywhere.
Hold on. So while all these women believed their money was growing, Sarah was living it up off their savings.
Yeah.
Did no one see any red flags? Was there no oversight?
Well, there were whispers, but Howe was really good at deflecting criticism.
Right.
She'd accuse anyone who questioned her of being sexist or jealous. Remember, a woman running a successful financial operation was practically unheard of back then, so she weaponized that societal bias to her advantage.
Wow. That's almost tuning the tables.
Yeah.
So this champion of women was actually using the very system that was holding them back to protect her own scheme.
Exactly. But as with all things built on lies, eventually the truth has to come out. And for Sarah Howe, that truth came crashing down courtesy of the Boston Daily Advertiser and their gutsy investigative journalism.
Oh, so the media steps in. What happened? Did they get a tip? Was it a whistleblower?
Well, from what we know, it seems like the advertiser started picking up on rumors and just decided to dig a little deeper. And this was a time when investigative journalism was just starting to take shape, so their work was truly groundbreaking.
Yeah.
They went undercover, interviewed people connected to Howe, meticulously picked apart the company's finances. It was a slow burn, but they eventually exposed the whole thing for the scam it was.
And I'm guessing this media attention caused quite a stir among Howe's investors.
Oh, yeah.
What happened when the truth came out?
Chaos.
Yeah.
Utter chaos. It triggered a massive run on the bank. Women were desperately trying to get their money back, but of course it was long gone.
So was Sarah living the millionaire lifestyle this whole time?
Wow.
Mansions, yachts, the whole 9 yards.
She wasn't exactly low-key. She had bought a $40,000 house in cash, which was an astronomical sum back then.
Yeah.
But that, along with some furniture, was about all that was left to pay back hundreds of women who had entrusted her with their life savings.
That's devastating. So what happened to Sarah? Did she face any consequences for her actions?
She did. She was arrested and charged with cheating by false pretenses.
Okay.
Now, despite having prominent lawyers and trying to claim some phantom Quaker charity was backing her, the jig was up. In 1881, Sarah Howe was convicted and sentenced to prison.
Wow, prison in the 1880s, that must have been rough.
Mm-hmm.
So is this where the story ends? Justice served, lesson learned?
Well, not quite. What's truly mind-boggling is that even after serving 3 years in prison, Sarah tried to pull a similar scheme again.
No.
It seems she just couldn't resist the allure of easy money and exploiting vulnerable people.
That's unbelievable. Didn't she learn anything? What about the victims? Did they ever get any justice?
Sadly, many of them never recovered financially from their losses. As for Sarah, her second attempt was on a much smaller scale, and for whatever reason, she never faced prosecution again. She eventually died in 1892, leaving behind a complicated legacy as one of America's first female financial fraudsters.
Okay, this is already a lot to unpack. It feels like we've just scratched the surface. We've got the historical narrative, but what about the deeper implications? What about those digging deeper points we talked about?
You're right. We need to delve into the cultural context of the time, understand how Victorian attitudes towards women, the obsession with get-rich-quick schemes, and even the popularity of spiritualism all played a role in Sarah Howe's rise and fall. And most importantly, we need to hear the stories of the women who were both drawn to and devastated by her operation. Their experiences offer a powerful window into the devastating consequences of financial fraud.
This is where it gets really interesting.
So let's shift gears a bit and try to really understand the women who got caught up in Sarah Howe's web of deceit. Their stories are truly heartbreaking, and they really get us a glimpse into the human cost of financial fraud.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the mechanics of the scam itself, the hows and the whys, but we can't forget about the real people who were deeply affected by this. I mean, what even motivated them to invest in the first place? Were they all just blinded by greed? Or was there something else going on?
That's a really important question, and we have to remember we're talking about the late 19th century, a time when single women had very, very few options, especially when it came to finances. Traditional banks often saw them as too risky or just not worth the effort. So when Howe comes along with her ladies' deposit company promising high returns and catering exclusively to women, it must have felt like a lifeline for them.
Right, it's like she was positioning herself as this champion of women's financial independence.
Exactly.
Which is ironic, considering she was exploiting them the whole time.
Exactly. She knew exactly what strings to pull. She used language that resonated with their desire for security and independence, things society often denied them. She tapped into their aspirations and anxieties.
You know, I was reading a piece in the Boston Globe from back then, and there was this quote from one of the depositors that just really stuck with me. She said, "I put every dollar I had into the bank, and if I lose it, I am a beggar." It just breaks your heart to think about the desperation and the misplaced trust these women placed in Howe.
Yeah, and many of them went to extreme lengths to invest. Some mortgaged their homes, others borrowed from family and friends, all believing they were building a better future. It's a stark reminder that these scams often prey on the most vulnerable among us, those who are struggling and desperate for a chance to improve their lives.
Yeah, it's striking, too, how much power there was in community and word-of-mouth marketing back then, especially for a group that felt excluded by the mainstream financial system. It makes sense that they'd be more likely to trust someone who seemed to understand their struggles and was offering a solution tailored specifically for them.
Absolutely. Howe cultivated that sense of community very, very carefully. She encouraged her investors to spread the word, and this created this web of trust that ultimately worked to her advantage. And it's a tactic still used today in affinity scams. Scammers know that exploiting existing social connections is a powerful way to gain credibility and build trust.
So it's not just about individual greed or naivete, but also about the systemic factors that create an environment where these scams can thrive.
Precisely. We have to understand the historical, social, and economic context that makes certain groups more susceptible. In Howe's case, it was this perfect storm of limited financial options for women, the allure of quick riches in a booming economy, and the power of community. all expertly manipulated by a charismatic and cunning individual.
Right. Earlier, we talked about the Boston Daily Advertiser's role in exposing the scheme.
Right.
Their investigation was pretty groundbreaking for the time, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Investigative journalism was still in its early stages back then, but the Advertiser's reporters, they were relentless. They went undercover, interviewed Howe and her associates, scrutinized the company's finances. They weren't afraid to dig deep and challenge the narrative.
So did Howe and her supporters just sit back and let this happen? I mean, she
Yeah.
had built up quite a following. It must have been hard to go against someone who was seen as a champion for women.
Oh, they definitely pushed back. Howe and her supporters tried to discredit the Advertiser, accusing them of sexism, jealousy, even spreading rumors. They claimed the paper was simply trying to bring down a successful woman.
Wow.
It's a tactic we still see today, trying to silence critics by labeling them as biased or vengeful.
So, familiar playbook. But the Advertiser didn't back down, and the reporting ultimately led to Howe's arrest and the collapse of the Ladies' Deposit Company. It's a testament to the power of good journalism to hold the powerful accountable and protect the public.
It also highlights the importance of a free and independent press. The Advertiser was willing to stand up to a popular and influential figure even when it was risky. True journalism requires courage, integrity, and a commitment to the truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient.
Yeah, and in this case, the truth was devastating for hundreds of women who had put their faith and their savings in Sarah Howe. But it also served as a cautionary tale,
Definitely.
a reminder that appearances can be deceiving,
Oh, yeah.
and even those who seem like benefactors can have hidden motives.
That lesson is just as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. Financial scams may evolve, but the tactics, playing on emotions, building trust, creating urgency, they remain strikingly similar. So as we navigate the complex world of finance and investment, we have to stay informed, ask questions, and be wary of anyone promising the impossible.
Because the line between a visionary and a con artist can be incredibly thin.
Exactly. And as Sarah Howe's story shows, that line can be easily blurred by charisma, manipulation, and the desire for quick riches.
So as we head into the final part of our deep dive, let's broaden our perspective a bit. What can we learn from this historical case that helps us navigate the financial landscape today? And how can we protect ourselves and our communities from falling victim to similar schemes in the modern era? So we've uncovered this fascinating and disturbing story from the 19th century, but what does it all mean for us today? How can Sarah Howe's tale help us navigate the financial world now?
That's a great question, and the answer might surprise you. Sarah Howe's story, though rooted in the 1800s, holds some surprisingly relevant lessons for the 21st century. It reminds us that at the heart of most financial scams, regardless of the era, are some pretty consistent tactics.
Okay, so what are those timeless red flags we should all be looking out for? I mean, the world's a different place now with online influencers, cryptocurrency, all these new investment opportunities popping up every day. How do we avoid falling into the same traps those women did back then?
Well, first and foremost, always be skeptical of anyone promising insanely high returns. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Remember Howe's 8% monthly interest? That was a huge red flag, designed to lure in people desperate for wealth.
It's that classic fear of missing out, right? Everyone wants to be in on the next big thing, especially when they see others seemingly profiting.
Exactly. But that's where critical thinking comes in. Don't let emotions drive your financial decisions. Do your research. If an investment opportunity seems too complicated or shrouded in secrecy, that's another big warning sign.
Yeah, and it's interesting how deliberately created this air of exclusivity around her company, telling people not to talk about it, making it seem even more enticing.
Oh, it's a classic manipulation tactic. Transparency is key. Legitimate investments don't shy away from scrutiny. Ask questions, demand clear explanations, and if your gut feeling is telling you something's off, listen to it.
And it's also fascinating how targeted a specific community, single women and widows who were already vulnerable due to social norms and limited financial choices back then, makes you wonder if we see similar tactics being used today.
Absolutely. This tactic, known as affinity fraud, is alive and well. Scammers still target specific groups based on shared identities, ethnicity, religion, professional networks, you name it. They exploit the trust and shared experiences within these communities, knowing it's easier to manipulate people who feel a sense of connection.
So it's not just about being financially savvy. It's also about being aware of how these scammers can exploit our social dynamics.
Precisely. Understanding how our identities and affiliations can make us vulnerable is crucial. If someone is pressuring you to invest based on shared beliefs or experiences, proceed with extreme caution.
This brings up a really important question.
Mm.
How can we as individuals and communities protect ourselves from these types of scams?
Right.
What can we do to make ourselves less vulnerable?
Education is paramount. We need to equip ourselves with the knowledge and tools to recognize and avoid these schemes. This means understanding common tactics, researching investment opportunities thoroughly, and knowing those red flags.
And it's also about talking to each other, right? Sharing information and warnings within our communities. If something seems fishy, don't be afraid to speak up.
Exactly. We can learn so much from each other's experiences and help protect those who might be more susceptible. And of course, there are fantastic resources available. Organizations dedicated to consumer protection and financial literacy. Don't hesitate to reach out for help or guidance if you need it.
So if we had to sum it all up, what's the big takeaway from Sarah Howe's story? What's the one thing you hope our listeners will remember from this deep dive?
I think the most important lesson is that the fight against financial fraud is a constant battle. It's a battle that demands vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge those who try to exploit us. By learning from the mistakes of the past, we can empower ourselves to make smarter choices and protect our financial well-being today.
Wow, powerful words to live by. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder Sarah Howe's legacy and how it resonates in our modern world. Until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.